A girl, holding two twins in her arms, burst into the church at the very moment of the I do and said, "Don't marry him." What she revealed made the bride faint. The autumn sun filtered through the century-old stained glass windows, painting the church interior with a soft kaleidoscope of colors. The scent of white roses and lilacs filled the air, blending with the anticipation emanating from the 200 impeccably dressed guests. At the altar, Thomas nervously adjusted his grey silk tie, his gaze fixed on the large oak doors at the far end of the nave. The congregation's murmur subsided when the first notes of the organ echoed through the Gothic vaults. The doors slowly opened, revealing Sophie, radiant in her lace gown. A collective sigh swept across the assembly. Her smile lit the aisle more brightly than any sunbeam. Thomas felt his heart race. Sophie took a step forward, the train of her dress softly brushing the red carpet. Suddenly, a loud bang made everyone turn around. The church's side doors flew open with force. A gust of cold wind swept in, causing the candles to flicker. Standing at the threshold, panting and disheveled, was a small girl. Her golden curls framed a determined, freckled face stained with tears. In her arms, she held two babies, who began to cry at the sudden noise. "Stop!" the girl's voice rang out, surprisingly firm for someone so small. "He can't get married." Shocked gazes darted between the child and Thomas, who had visibly paled. Sophie, frozen in the middle of the aisle, watched the scene with growing confusion. The girl advanced, her footsteps echoing in the silent nave. Fresh tears sparkled on her cheeks, yet her voice did not tremble. "Aunt Sophie, don't marry him." "Uncle Thomas, Thomas took a step forward, extending a trembling hand. "Emma, what are you doing here? How—" His voice faltered as he noticed the babies in her arms. Emma lifted her chin defiantly. "He left me and my mom, and these—" She looked down at the twins in her arms. "These are his kids." A collective gasp rippled through the church. Sophie staggered, her veil slipping as she turned to Thomas, eyes wide with disbelief. "Thomas!" Her voice was barely a whisper. What is going on?" Before Thomas could respond, Emma continued, her voice choked with emotion. "Mom's in the hospital. She's really sick, and he didn't even know about the babies when he left." Thomas's face was a mask of shock and guilt. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The church was deafeningly silent, broken only by Emma's soft sobs and the baby's cries. Sophie took an unsteady step toward the girl. Her eyes moved from Emma to the babies, noticing familiar features that suddenly seemed painfully obvious. Then her gaze locked with Thomas's. The understanding and betrayal that crossed Sophie's face were visceral. She opened her mouth, maybe to scream, maybe to cry. But before she could do anything, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed onto the floor, her white dress billowing around her like a fallen flower. Chaos erupted in the church. Shouts and exclamations echoed off the stone walls. Sophie's mother ran down the aisle, kneeling by her unconscious daughter. Thomas's father rushed toward Emma, who stepped back protectively, clutching the twins against her chest. Thomas remained paralyzed at the altar, his eyes darting between Sophie on the ground, Emma standing firm, and the babies in her arms. The weight of his past choices and the present consequences seemed to crush him. In the midst of the confusion, Emma stood strong, her blue eyes so much like Thomas's, fixed on the man she had once called father. She was small, but at that moment, she carried the weight of long-buried truths and futures irrevocably altered. While paramedics rushed to tend to Sophie and horrified guests whispered among themselves, the scene froze into a tableau of broken promises and intertwined lives. The happily ever after planned for that day had shattered, leaving in its wake an uncertain future, woven with threads of exposed secrets and broken hearts. The sound of the twins' cries echoed through the nave, a sharp reminder that, even amid chaos, life, in all its messy complexity, carried on. And for everyone present in that church, nothing would ever be the same again. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small apartment, mingling with the scent of fresh paint and children's laughter. Thomas, his hair disheveled and streaked with blue paint, chased a 3-year-old Emma down the narrow hallway. The child, a tiny whirlwind of golden curls and boundless energy, shrieked with joy each time she slipped away from the paint monster. Claire watched from the kitchen, a gentle smile playing on her lips as she stirred pancake batter. The sound of her daughter's happiness was music to her ears, a melody she feared she'd never hear again after Emma's father had passed away 2 years prior. "Got you, little painter," Thomas's voice rang out, followed by Emma's delighted squeal. Claire turned just in time to see Thomas lifting the girl in the air, both of them covered in paint and laughing uncontrollably. "You two, look what you did to my freshly painted kitchen." Claire pretended to scold them, but couldn't help bursting into laughter at the sight of blue handprints all over the white wall. Thomas set Emma down and approached Claire, hugging her from behind. "Sorry, love, I promised to clean it all up after breakfast." Claire turned in his arms, raising an eyebrow. "After breakfast, huh? And what makes you think you're getting pancakes after this mess?" Thomas's eyes gleamed mischievously. "Because you love us." "Pancakes, pancakes," Emma sang out, hopping around them. Claire sighed dramatically, giving in. "All right, you troublemakers, but you both are cleaning this up later, understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Thomas saluted, making Emma burst into laughter again. Moments later, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, savoring pancakes with strawberry syrup. Emma, her face smeared with both blue paint and red syrup, looked like a tiny piece of abstract art. "So, what do my artists have planned for today?" Claire asked, wiping some syrup from Emma's chin. Thomas exchanged a conspiratorial glance with the little girl. "Well, I was thinking of taking my assistant to the park. Maybe we can find some inspiration for our next masterpiece." "Yes, the park, I want the big swing," Emma exclaimed, nearly spilling her milk in her excitement. Claire laughed, catching the cup just in time. "Careful, little painter. And Thomas, don't forget we have that dinner with your parents tonight." A fleeting shadow crossed Thomas's face, so brief Claire almost missed it. But before she could ask, his smile returned. "Sure, I won't forget. We'll be back in time, right, Emma?" The girl nodded vigorously, her mouth full of pancake. The day passed in a blur of laughter, sunshine, and fun at the park. Thomas pushed Emma on the swing, her cries of "higher" echoing through the playground. Claire watched them from a nearby bench, her heart overflowing with love for her little makeshift family. When Thomas came into her life, a year after her husband's death, Claire had been reluctant to let anyone get close. But the way he connected with Emma, the patience and affection he showed, melted her defenses. Now, watching them together, she could hardly remember life before him. That evening, after a tense dinner with Thomas's parents, an event Claire preferred not to overanalyze, they put an exhausted Emma to bed. The little girl clutched her stuffed bunny, sleepily murmuring, "Good night, Mommy. Good night, Daddy Thomas." Claire felt Thomas freeze beside her. It was the first time Emma had called him that. Tears gleamed in his eyes as he leaned down to kiss the child's forehead. "Good night, my little artist." Later, lying in bed, Claire traced lazy patterns on Thomas's chest. "She called you Dad," she whispered, a smile in her voice. Thomas was silent for a moment, then turned to face her. "Claire, I need to tell you something." Alarmed by the serious tone in his voice, Claire sat up. "What is it?" "Did something happen?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Do you remember that job offer I mentioned a few weeks ago in another city?" Claire nodded slowly, a knot forming in her stomach. "Well, they offered me the position. It's an incredible opportunity, Claire, the kind that changes lives." "That's great, Thomas," Claire forced a smile. "When do you start? We need to look for apartments there and schools for Emma." Thomas looked away. "Claire, I accepted it. I start next week." Claire's world seemed to stop. "Next week? But how? When did you decide this?" "Today, after dinner with my parents. Well, never mind. It's what's best for my career, Claire. I need to do this." "What about us? What about Emma?" Claire's voice trembled. Thomas hesitated. "I thought, maybe it's better if I go alone first. Get settled, see how things go. Then we can decide." His words trailed off as Claire abruptly got up. "Decide? Thomas, there's nothing to decide. Emma calls you Dad. We're a family. Claire, please, try to understand. But Claire was no longer listening. The world she had so carefully rebuilt was crumbling once again. The next morning, Claire woke up to an empty bed and a note on the kitchen table. Claire, I'm so sorry, I can't do this. The pressure, the expectations, I'm not ready. You both deserve someone better. Please tell Emma I'm sorry. Claire sank into a chair. The note crumpled in her fist. The tears she had refused to shed the night before finally came, silent and bitter. A week later, as Emma asked for the 100th time where Daddy Thomas was, Claire sat in the bathroom, staring in disbelief at the pregnancy test in her hands. 2 pink lines mocked her, a cruel reminder of the man who had left them. With trembling hands, Claire stroked her still flat belly. It's okay, she whispered, more to herself than to the baby who had no idea it existed. We'll be all right. From the next room, Emma's sleepy voice called out, Mommy, where's Daddy Thomas? Claire closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The past was silent, but the future would be what she made of it, for Emma and for the baby on the way. I'm coming, sweetheart, she replied, wiping away her tears. It was time to be strong, time to start over. Yet again, the shrill sound of the alarm cut through the silence of the luxurious apartment. Thomas reached out blindly to silence it. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the soft light filtering through the silk curtains. He sat up in the king-size bed, running his hands over his face to banish the last traces of sleep. The room around him stood as a testament to his success. Designer furniture, abstract artwork on the walls, a panoramic view of the city. Everything screamed achievement, but there was a void that no amount of luxury could fill. Thomas shook his head, pushing away unwelcome thoughts. There was no room for regrets in his new life. He got up, determined to face another day as the brilliant executive he had become. In the shower, he let the hot water cascade over his tense shoulders. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember different mornings, a child's laughter, the smell of pancakes, paint-smeared walls. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if he could block out the memories. Focus, Thomas, he murmured to himself. You made your choice. Hours later, immaculate in his Italian suit, Thomas crossed the marble lobby of a luxury hotel. A business convention awaited him, another opportunity to expand his network and cement his position in the company. That was when he saw her. She stood at the reception desk, a vision in a navy blue dress that accentuated her elegant silhouette. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and when she turned, Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Their eyes met. A shy smile curved her lips, and Thomas found himself walking toward her before he even realized what he was doing. Hi, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Also here for the convention, she nodded, extending her hand. Sophie Durand, representing Durand Enterprises. Thomas Lefebvre, he replied, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. Looks like we'll be competitors today. Her smile widened. May the best one win, then. Meanwhile, miles away, in a small suburban apartment, Claire leaned over the toilet, nauseous. This pregnancy was proving harder than she had imagined, especially carrying twins. Mommy? Emma's worried voice came from the other side of the door. Are you sick again? Claire took a deep breath, trying to control the wave of nausea. I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be out in a minute. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, she found Emma waiting, clutching her stuffed bunny. The little girl's eyes, so much like Thomas's, were wide with concern. Are the babies hurting you, Mummy? Claire offered a weak smile, stroking her daughter's curls. No, my love, they're just moving around a lot. That's normal. Emma frowned, not entirely convinced. Then, as though remembering something important, her eyes lit up. Mommy, will Daddy Thomas come back to take care of you and the babies? Claire's heart constricted. 3 months had passed, and Emma still asked about him almost every day. No, sweetheart. Remember, Daddy Thomas, he had to go away forever. Emma's lips quivered. But why? Doesn't he like us anymore? Claire pulled her daughter into a tight hug, fighting back her own tears. Sometimes people go away even if they do like us, Emma. It's not your fault or mine. It's just life. Later that night, after putting Emma to bed, Claire sat at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of her. Her fingers traced the red numbers, a knot forming in her stomach. Late rent, mounting medical expenses, the double stroller she would need. Everything seemed impossible on her preschool teacher's salary. And now, with maternity leave approaching, the prospects were even bleaker. Claire allowed herself a moment of weakness, burying her face in her hands. How had it come to this? Just months ago, the future seemed so bright, so full of promise. A sudden kick in her belly brought her back to reality. Claire placed her hand over her prominent stomach, feeling the twins move. "It's okay, little ones," she whispered. "Mommy will find a way. We always do, right?" From the next room, Emma's sleepy voice called out, "Mommy, where's Daddy Thomas?" Claire closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The past was silent, but the future, she would shape it, for Emma and for the babies yet to be born. "I'm on my way, honey," she said, wiping away tears. "Time to be strong. Time to begin again." Back at the hotel, Thomas laughed at something Sophie had said, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. The convention had ended hours ago, but they remained at the hotel bar, lost in their own bubble. "So," Sophie said, leaning in a bit closer, "what does a brilliant executive like you do for fun?" Thomas hesitated for a second. Images of parks, picnics, and Sunday morning cartoons crossed his mind. He pushed them away quickly. "Oh, you know," he replied with a charming smile. "The usual, fine dining, spontaneous trips to Paris, and nothing too exciting." Sophie laughed, the melodic sound causing something to stir within him. "Well, Mr. Lefebvre, I think you might need someone to show you what real fun is." Their eyes locked, a silent promise hanging between them. Thomas felt a wave of excitement mixed with something he refused to acknowledge as guilt. "Perhaps you're right, Mrs. Durand," he murmured, lifting his glass in a silent toast. Meanwhile, Claire finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted after hours of budgeting and planning. In her restless dreams, she saw only an uncertain future, but one still filled with love. Emma slept in the next room, clutching her stuffed bunny, a gift from Thomas, tight against her chest. And somewhere between these two realities, fate was weaving invisible threads, preparing to intertwine lives that should never have been separated. Emma pressed her nose against the foggy window of the school bus, her bright blue eyes taking in every detail of the busy street. At 5 years old, she was already known for her insatiable curiosity and vivid imagination. "What are you looking for, Emma?" asked Lily, her best friend nudging her. Emma turned, determination shining in her eyes. "Clues," she whispered dramatically. "Mommy said Daddy Thomas had to go away forever, but I think he's hiding somewhere." Lily frowned, confused. "But why would he hide?" Emma shrugged, turning her attention back to the window. "Don't know, but I'll find out." The bus stopped in front of the primary school, and Emma hopped off, her princess backpack bouncing behind her. As she walked to her classroom, her eyes took in every detail. A man in a suit rushing past, a woman pushing a twin stroller, a couple laughing outside a coffee shop. Any one of them could be a clue, she thought. Any of them could lead to Daddy Thomas. The morning passed in a blur of math lessons and story time. Emma participated distractedly, her mind returning again and again to her secret mission. During recess, while the other children played, she sat under a tree, scribbling in her detective notebook, a birthday gift from Claire. That was when she heard something that made her heart pound. "Did you see that wedding announcement in the paper?" a teacher was saying to another. "Thomas Lefebvre and Sophie Durand. What a lovely couple." Emma froze. Thomas. Daddy's name. Wedding. Heart racing. She crept closer, pretending to tie her shoelaces. "Oh yes, I did," the other teacher replied. "They say it will be the event of the year, this Saturday at the city's cathedral." The bell rang, cutting the conversation short. Emma returned to class, her mind spinning. Daddy Thomas was getting married, to someone who wasn't Mommy. The rest of the day flew by in a haze. When the bus dropped her off at home, Emma burst inside, determined to tell Claire everything. But as she opened the door, she stopped in her tracks. Claire was on the sofa, pale and panting, one hand on her enormous belly. Next to her sat Mrs. Watson, the elderly neighbor from upstairs, holding Claire's hand. "Emma, sweetie," Claire said weakly, "Mommy needs to go to the hospital. The babies, they want to come a little earlier than we expected." Emma's world seemed to spin. Hospital. Babies. But she had to tell about Daddy Thomas. Before she could speak, Mrs. Watson took her by the hand. "Come along, dear. You'll stay with me while your mum goes to the hospital, all right?" Emma nodded numbly, watching paramedics rush in to take Claire. As she climbed the stairs to Mrs. Watson's apartment, her mind raced. She had to do something. She had to stop that wedding. In Mrs. Watson's cozy apartment, Emma sat at the kitchen table, a cup of warm milk with honey in front of her. The elderly woman watched her with kind eyes. "What's going on in that little head, my dear?" Mrs. Watson asked gently. Emma bit her lip, hesitant. Then words poured out. "Daddy Thomas is getting married, but he can't. He has to come back to us. And now Mommy's in the hospital, and the babies are coming, and everything is wrong." Mrs. Watson listened patiently, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. When Emma finished, breathless and tearful, the older woman let out a deep sigh. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured, pulling Emma into a hug. "That's a big burden for such small shoulders." Emma sniffed against Mrs. Watson's soft sweater. "I need to do something," she said, her voice muffled. "I need to stop the wedding." Mrs. Watson pulled back gently, holding Emma by the shoulders. Her wise eyes studied the determined face. "And how do you plan to do that, dear?" Emma frowned, thinking. Then her eyes brightened. "The wedding. It's this Saturday. If I can just get there." Mrs. Watson shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "Emma, honey, it's not that simple. Your mom's in the hospital, and you're just a child." But Emma had already stopped listening. Her 5-year-old brain was working overtime, forming a plan. She jumped from the chair, running to the window. From there, she could see the cathedral on the city skyline. "Mrs. Watson," she said, turning with shining eyes, "I need your help." The older woman sighed, recognizing the familiar stubbornness in the girl's gaze. "Oh my goodness. What are you planning, dear?" Over the following hours, as they waited for news of Claire, Emma outlined her plan to Mrs. Watson. The older woman alternated between shock, worry, and, surprisingly, admiration. "Emma," she finally said, "what you're suggesting is, well, it's madness. It's dangerous. It's necessary," Emma finished, her chin set defiantly. Mrs. Watson studied the girl for a long moment. Then, to Emma's surprise, a slow smile spread across her wrinkled face. "You know something. You remind me a lot of myself when I was young," she said, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. "So determined, so brave. Maybe it's time for one last adventure for this old lady." Emma jumped, hugging Mrs. Watson with all her strength. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." At that moment, the phone rang. It was the hospital. The twins had been born, small but healthy. Claire was fine, but would need to stay in the hospital for a few days. As Mrs. Watson talked on the phone, Emma looked out the window again. The cathedral stood tall against the evening sky. Somewhere in there, Daddy Thomas was about to make a big mistake, and she, Emma, the 5-year-old detective, was going to stop him. With equal parts determination and fear, she clutched her stuffed bunny, the last gift from Thomas, against her chest. "Don't worry, Mommy," she whispered. "I'll bring Daddy back, for all of us." Mrs. Watson hung up and turned to Emma, a conspiratorial look on her face. "Well, dear, it seems we have a mission ahead of us. Let Operation Rescue Daddy begin." Emma nodded solemnly, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and excitement. The greatest challenge of her young life was about to begin. The silence that fell over the church was deafening, where moments earlier the solemn notes of the organ and the excited murmur of the guests had resounded. Now hung a palpable tension, as though the very air had frozen. Sophie, still on the floor, began to regain consciousness. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. The first thing she saw was her mother's worried face leaning over her. "Sophie, darling, are you all right?" Marguerite Durand's voice quivered with concern. Gradually, the memory of those last few moments came rushing back. The white dress, the altar, Thomas, the girl, the babies. Sophie sat up abruptly, ignoring the dizziness that followed. Where is she?" she asked, her voice raspy. Her eyes swept the church interior, now a chaos of shocked guests and panicked relatives. And there, in the middle of the aisle, stood Emma. The little girl held the twins with protective fierceness, her blue eyes, so much like Thomas's, fixed on Sophie. Thomas. The name echoed in her mind like an accusation. Sophie turned, searching for him. He stood at the altar, pale as a ghost, eyes wide with shock and guilt. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Sophie felt the ground vanish beneath her once more. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice heavy with pain and disbelief. "Is it true?" His silence was answer enough. "No," Thomas finally spoke, his voice high-pitched and desperate. It's not what it looks like. Sophie, I can explain." He descended from the altar, reaching out to her with pleading hands. But before he could get close, Sophie's father stepped between them. "Stay away from my daughter," Georges Durand growled, his usually dignified demeanor replaced by barely contained fury. The tension in the church reached a breaking point. On one side, the Durand family stood protectively around Sophie. On the other, Thomas's parents surrounded him, whispering furiously. In the midst of it all, Emma remained steadfast, the twins now quiet in her arms, as though sensing the gravity of the situation. "I demand to know what's going on," George's booming voice cut through the air. "Who is this child? Where did these babies come from?" Thomas took a step forward, his face twisted with anguish. "Mr. Durand, please, I can explain. There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Sophie's voice rose, trembling with anger and hurt. She got to her feet, gently pushing her mother's hands aside. "You call this a misunderstanding, Thomas? This girl, she called you Daddy." Hearing her name, Emma looked up, taking a few steps forward. "He is my daddy," she said, her small voice firm. "And theirs too," she added, motioning to the twins. A shocked murmur rippled through the congregation. Thomas's mother let out a muffled groan, while his father's face turned red with rage. "Thomas!" he roared. "What have you done?" Thomas seemed to shrink under the weight of their accusing stares. I didn't know about the twins," he stammered. "Claire never told me." "Claire," Sophie repeated, the name falling from her lips like poison. "Who is Claire?" Emma answered before Thomas could. "My mom. She's in the hospital. The babies came early because of the stress." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie staggered as though she'd been punched in the stomach. Her mind spun, trying to process the enormity of the betrayal. "How long?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting between Sophie, Emma, and his parents. "Sophie, please, how long?" she shouted, making everyone in the church jump. Thomas swallowed hard. Three years, he finally admitted. Sophie felt her legs give out again. 3 years. Their entire relationship had been a lie. Chaos broke out once more. Guests began to leave hastily, whispering among themselves. The Durand family closed ranks around Sophie, shooting murderous looks in Thomas's direction. The Lefebvres, in turn, seemed torn between anger and shock. Amid the uproar, Emma found herself jostled back and forth. The twins began to wail, frightened by the noise and commotion. "Hey!" she shouted, her small voice almost lost in the tumult. "Stop! You're scaring the babies!" Surprisingly, her cry seemed to cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at the 5-year-old girl, who now rocked the twins protectively. "You're all grown-ups," Emma went on, her voice trembling slightly, but her eyes shining with determination far beyond her years. "You should know how to behave better." The silence that followed was filled with shame. Sophie, still trembling, took a step toward Emma. "You're right," she said softly. "I'm sorry we scared you." She knelt in front of Emma, ignoring her family's silent protest. Up close, she could clearly see the resemblances between the girl and Thomas. The same nose, the same shape of eyes. It was undeniable. What's your name?" Sophie asked gently. "Emma," the girl answered, chin raised defiantly, though her eyes revealed a fear that tore at Sophie's heart. "Emma," Sophie repeated, a sad smile forming on her lips. "That's a beautiful name. And these are your little brothers?" Emma nodded, relaxing slightly. "They were born today. I don't even know their names yet." Thomas, who had been watching the scene with a mix of guilt and admiration, took a hesitant step toward them. "Sophie, But Sophie raised a hand, silencing him without even looking his way. Her eyes remained fixed on Emma and the twins. "You must be hungry," she said softly, "and tired. Let's get you out of here, okay? Somewhere quieter." Emma hesitated, glancing between Sophie and Thomas. "But what about Daddy?" Sophie's heart ached at hearing Emma call Thomas Daddy, but she kept her composure. "Your dad? He has some things to sort out here. But don't worry, we'll take care of you." She stood and held out her hand to Emma. The little girl looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly took it. As Sophie led Emma and the twins out of the church, past stunned guests and bewildered relatives, she felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, but also, surprisingly, a spark of something that felt dangerously like protectiveness. Behind them, chaos continued. But at that moment, as they stepped into the sunlight, Sophie made a silent promise. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. These children would not pay for the adults' mistakes. The wedding dress trailed across the church floor, a reminder of the dream that had just collapsed. But as they walked away, Sophie realized that maybe, just maybe, something new and unexpected could be born from the ashes of this day. The hotel room was a sanctuary of silence amid the aftermath of the church disaster. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the open laptop before her. Her wedding dress, now wrinkled and stained, lay forgotten on the floor. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Claire plus Thomas Lefebvre." The search revealed a torrent of information that made her stomach churn. Photos of Thomas smiling alongside a blonde, bright-eyed woman, Emma, younger, in his arms at a park. Art exhibit announcements featuring Claire's name prominently. Each image, each scrap of information, was like a knife twisting in her chest. 3 years. He had led a double life for 3 years. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her dark thoughts. "Sophie." Her mother's hesitant voice came through. "Sweetheart, you need to eat something." Sophie ignored her, scrolling furiously through the pages. She needed answers. She needed to understand. Her phone vibrated, displaying a text from an unknown number. "Central Hospital. Claire got worse. Emma asking for you." Sophie froze. Emma, the determined little girl who had carried the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Before she could think twice, Sophie found herself typing, "I'm on my way." At the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and the constant beeping of monitors filled the air. Sophie found Emma curled up in a chair too big for her, the twins sleeping in a nearby bassinet. "Hi," Sophie said softly, kneeling in front of the girl. Emma raised her eyes, red from crying. "You came," she whispered, her voice a mix of surprise and relief. "Of course I did," Sophie replied, surprised at how sincere she sounded. "How's your mom?" Emma's lower lip trembled. "They say she's sleeping, but she won't wake up, and the doctors look worried." Sophie felt her heart tighten. Tentatively, she extended her hand, gently touching Emma's shoulder. "Do you want to tell me what happened? How you got to the church?" Emma nodded slowly, then the words spilled out. She told Sophie about overhearing her teachers talking about the wedding, her plan with Mrs. Watson, and her determination to stop her daddy from making a mistake. "I just wanted us to be a family again," Emma concluded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Sophie swallowed the lump in her own throat. "You're very brave, Emma," she said gently. "And very smart for your age." At that moment, the door opened, revealing a disheveled, haggard Thomas. He stopped short upon seeing Sophie, eyes widening in shock. Sophie, he gasped. I didn't expect... What are you doing here? Before Sophie could answer, Emma ran to Thomas, hugging his legs. Daddy, you came. Will Mommy be okay now? Conflict raged on Thomas's face. He stroked Emma's hair automatically, but his eyes stayed on Sophie. I don't know, sweetheart. The doctors are doing their best. Sophie rose, crossing her arms defensively. I think you owe us some explanations, Thomas. He nodded slowly, guilt etched into every line of his face. Sophie, I'm so sorry. I never wanted things to get this far. When I met Claire, I was at a low point in my life. Emma, she filled a void I didn't even know I had. But then the job opportunity came and I ran away, Sophie interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Thomas flinched. I panicked. I thought I wasn't ready to be a dad, to have a family. Then I met you, and I thought I could start over, do things right this time. Emma, still clutching Thomas's legs, looked between the two adults, her eyes big and confused. And you never thought to tell the truth? Sophie asked, hurt evident in her voice. Before Thomas could reply, the door opened again. This time it was Sophie's parents and Thomas's parents. What is she doing here? Thomas's mother hissed, throwing a venomous look at Sophie. She has every right to be here. Sophie's father shot back, placing a protective arm around his daughter. The tension in the room was palpable. The twins, sensing the agitation, began to fuss in the bassinet. Stop! Emma suddenly cried, her small voice firm. You're scaring the babies, and Mommy needs quiet to get better. The silence that followed was deafening. All the adults looked chastised, reminded of their place by a 5-year-old. Sophie was the first to move, going to the bassinet to calm the twins. As she rocked them gently, she made a decision. This has to stop, she said, her voice calm but resolute. No matter what happened in the past, we need to think about these children. Claire needs to recover, and they need stability. She turned to Thomas, her eyes steely. You will take responsibility. All of it. Thomas nodded, remorse and gratitude evident in his gaze. I will. I promise. The parents on both sides seemed to want to protest, but something in Sophie's stance made them hesitate. Emma, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, approached Sophie timidly. Are you going to help us? Sophie looked at the girl, then at the twins in her arms, and finally at Thomas. A complex mix of emotions crossed her face. Hurt, anger, but also a fierce determination. Yes, Emma, she said quietly. I'll help. We all will. As night fell over the hospital, a new dynamic began to form. It wasn't the family Sophie had imagined having that day, nor the one Thomas had run from years ago. It was something new, born out of chaos and pain, but also out of compassion and strength. And at the center of it all, sleeping peacefully in Sophie's arms, were the twins, a silent reminder that sometimes love comes in the most unexpected forms. The corridor of the hospital seemed endless as Sophie walked toward Claire's room. Each step was an internal battle between curiosity and fear of what she would find. She paused at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. On the other side was the woman who unknowingly had shared the same man with her for years. Taking a deep breath, Sophie walked in. Claire lay in bed, pale and fragile, but her eyes opened the moment Sophie entered. For a moment, the two women stared at each other in silence, years of unspoken history hanging between them. You must be Sophie, Claire finally said, her voice raspy. There was no accusation in her tone, only deep exhaustion. Sophie nodded, approaching hesitantly. And you're Claire. I'm sorry about all this. A sad smile tugged at Claire's lips. You're not the one who should apologize. Silence fell again, but this time it was less tense. Sophie sat in the chair beside the bed, studying the woman before her. She could see Emma's features in her, the same golden curls, the same determined chin. How are my children? Claire asked, the worry obvious in her voice. They're fine, Sophie replied gently. Emma is incredible, so strong and brave, and the twins are healthy, even though they arrived a bit early. Tears glistened in Claire's eyes. "I barely got to hold them," she whispered. "Everything happened so fast." Without thinking, Sophie took Claire's hand. "You'll have all the time in the world with them once you're out of here, I promise." Claire squeezed Sophie's hand, gratitude shining in her gaze. "Why are you doing this? After everything?" Sophie paused, considering the question. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because deep down, we're both victims of the same lie." The two women shared a look of mutual understanding. In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a start. Days passed. Sophie divided her time between the hospital, caring for the twins, and spending time with Emma. The child, initially cautious, began to warm up more and more. On a sunny afternoon, Sophie took Emma to the park near the hospital. While Emma played on the swing, Sophie watched her, marveling at the girl's resilience. "Higher," Emma shouted, laughing. Sophie smiled, pushing the swing a bit harder. "Sophie," Emma called after a while, her voice suddenly serious, "are you going to leave when Mommy gets better?" Sophie's heart clenched. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" Emma shrugged, her feet scraping the ground to stop the swing. "Everybody always leaves." Sophie knelt in front of her, holding her little hands. "Emma, look at me. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I promise." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Really, really, 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 really," Sophie confirmed, pulling Emma into a tight hug. Meanwhile, Thomas seemed more distant than ever. He visited the hospital, of course, but always appeared uncomfortable, torn between two worlds that should never have collided. One evening, after putting the twins to sleep in the makeshift hospital nursery, Sophie found Thomas pacing the corridor. "Are they asleep?" he asked, avoiding eye contact. Sophie nodded. "Thomas, we need to talk." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sophie, I know I messed everything up." "It's not about us," Sophie interrupted. "It's about the kids. They need you. Emma asks about you all the time." Thomas closed his eyes, guilt etched on his face. "I don't know how to do this. How to be a dad." "No one is born knowing," Sophie said gently. "But you have to try. For them." Before Thomas could respond, the door to Claire's room opened. A nurse stepped out, smiling. "She's asking for both of you," the nurse said. Sophie and Thomas exchanged a surprised glance, then walked in. Claire was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in days. "Hi," she said, her gaze moving between the two of them. "I think it's time we had a serious talk." The three adults sat down, the air heavy with unspoken expectations. Claire was the first to break the silence. "Thomas, what you did, it was unforgivable. But our children need a father." "Sophie," she turned to the other woman, "you've been amazing with Emma and the twins, more than I could ever hope for." Sophie felt tears welling up. "They're amazing kids, Claire." Claire smiled, then looked seriously at both of them. "I don't know how, but we need to make this work for our children." Thomas looked lost. "I don't know if I can be what you need me to be." "Then learn," Claire said firmly, "because they deserve the best from all of us." Sophie felt a surge of determination. "Claire's right, it won't be easy, but we can do this, together." The three sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. Then a soft cry came from the bassinet in the corner of the room. Without hesitation, Sophie got up to pick up the baby. She soothed him gently, whispering soft words. Claire watched, a grateful smile on her lips. "Have you chosen their names yet?" Sophie asked, returning to the bedside. Claire looked at Thomas, who seemed surprised by the question. "Actually," Claire said, "I was thinking, Sophie, would you like to help choose?" Sophie's surprise was evident. "Me, but you're part of this now," Claire said softly. "If you want to be, that is." Sophie looked down at the baby in her arms, then at Claire, and finally at Thomas. She saw in them the reflection of a family she had never imagined, but now couldn't imagine leaving. "I'd love to," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. In that moment, as they discussed baby names and made plans for the future, something new began to bloom. Not a traditional family, far from it. It was complicated. imperfect and born out of chaos, but it was theirs. And as the sun set outside the hospital window, bathing the room in a golden glow, Sophie realized that sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones we never expect to form. The lawyer's office was all polished mahogany and leather, heavy with the weight of serious decisions. Sophie sat stiffly in one of the leather chairs, fingers drumming nervously on her purse in her lap. Next to her, Claire looked pale but determined, still visibly tired from her extended hospital stay. Across the imposing desk, their attorney, Mr. Carter, peered at them over his thin-framed glasses. "So," he began, his deep voice filling the silence, "you want to initiate joint custody proceedings, correct?" Claire nodded, her voice firm despite her weary appearance. "Yes, Sophie has been, well, she's been incredible with the children. We want to formalize her role in their lives." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. The past few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, but amid the chaos, she had found purpose in Emma's smiles and the twins' trusting gazes. Mr. Carter frowned, flipping through the papers before him. "And the biological father, Mr. Lefebvre?" A tense silence fell. Sophie and Claire exchanged a look loaded with meaning. "Thomas, he's having trouble adjusting," Sophie explained carefully. "But we want him to be part of the children's lives if he's willing." The attorney nodded slowly. "I see, but I must warn you, this won't be simple. Joint custody among 3 parties, especially when one has no biological ties, is unusual, to say the least." Claire leaned forward, eyes shining with determination. "We'll do whatever it takes. These children deserve stability and love, no matter where it comes from." As they left the office, Sophie felt the weight of the battle to come, but seeing Claire walking beside her, head held high despite her obvious fatigue, she knew she wasn't alone. The following days were a whirlwind of paperwork, medical appointments, and sleepless nights. Claire began intensive treatment to regain her strength after the premature birth and her hospital stay. Sophie juggled a life she never imagined, caring for the twins, taking Emma to school, coordinating doctor visits, and trying to maintain her own work from home. One afternoon, while Sophie tried to calm one of the twins and simultaneously help Emma with her homework, the doorbell rang. It was Thomas, looking uneasy and out of place. "Hi," he said hesitantly. "I thought I'd stop by to see the kids." Sophie nodded, opening the door wider. "Come in." "Emma's doing her homework in the kitchen." Thomas entered, eyes sweeping the apartment. Toys were everywhere. A pile of baby clothes waited to be folded, and children's books mingled with legal documents on the coffee table. It was the picture of organized chaos. "Daddy!" Emma's excited voice carried from the kitchen. She ran over, flinging herself into Thomas's arms. For a moment, his face lit up, and Sophie glimpsed the man she had once fallen for. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, replaced by a barely disguised panic. "Hi, Princess," he said, his voice tense. "How are you?" Emma chatted about school and new friends, about how Sophie helped her with her lessons. Thomas listened, but his eyes kept flitting around the apartment, as if searching for an escape route. Sophie watched them with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Thomas," she said softly, "would you like to hold one of the twins?" He stepped back almost imperceptibly. Maybe later. I don't want to bother them if they're sleeping." A heavy silence fell, laden with unspoken words and unmet expectations. Later, after Thomas left with vague promises to return soon, Sophie found Emma sitting quietly on the couch, hugging her favorite stuffed bunny. "Hey, sweetie," Sophie said, sitting beside her. "Are you okay?" Emma bit her lip, her big eyes full of a sadness no 5-year-old should ever know. "Does Daddy not like us anymore?" Sophie's heart broke. She pulled Emma close. "Oh, honey, it's not that. Your dad? He's just having a hard time understanding how to be a good father, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." Emma sniffed. "But you know how to be a good mom, and you're not even my real mom." Tears stung Sophie's eyes. "Love comes in many different forms, Emma, and sometimes families do too." That night, after the children were asleep, Sophie called Claire, who was still at the treatment center. "How are things?" Claire asked, her voice tired but affectionate. Sophie sighed, leaning back on the couch. Hard. Thomas came by today. Oh, Claire said, understanding in her tone. It didn't go well, I presume. He's trying, I think, but it's not enough. The kids deserve more. A moment of silence passed on the other end of the line. Then Claire spoke, her voice filled with fierce determination. Then we'll give them more. You and I, Sophie, no matter what happens, no matter what Thomas decides, these children will have all the love in the world. Sophie felt a wave of gratitude and affection for this woman who, under other circumstances, might have been her rival. You're right. We can do this. As she hung up, Sophie looked at the photos on the wall. Emma laughing at the park, the twins peacefully sleeping, Claire holding the babies for the first time in the hospital. And in the middle of them, a new addition, a selfie of Sophie with the 3 children, all smiling, faces smeared with ice cream on a day at the park. It wasn't the family she had imagined. It was complicated, imperfect, born from chaos, but it was hers. And for them, she would fight every battle necessary. With a determined smile, Sophie picked up the custody documents from the table, ready for another night of study. The legal battle would be long and difficult, but looking at those photos, at those smiles, she knew every moment would be worth it. Because in the end, love, in all its unexpected forms, always wins. The lab was cold and sterile, smelling of antiseptic and silent promises. Sophie held Emma's hand tightly, watching the technician prepare the DNA collection kit. Across the room, Thomas sat stiffly, his face a mask of barely concealed anxiety. Will it hurt? Emma asked in a small voice, her big eyes on the needle the technician held. Sophie knelt beside her, smiling gently. Just a tiny bit, sweetie, like a mosquito bite. You're brave, remember? Emma nodded, squaring her shoulders as though preparing for battle. Sophie felt a surge of pride at the child's resilience. Mr. Lefebvre, the technician called, we can start with you. Thomas stood, hesitant. While the technician took his sample, Sophie couldn't help noticing how small and fragile he looked. Where was the confident man she had once loved? The man who just weeks ago was supposed to say, I do, at the altar. When it was Emma's turn, the girl squeezed Sophie's hand. Will you stay with me? She whispered. Always, Sophie replied, feeling the weight of that promise. The process was quick. Within minutes, the samples were sealed. The results will be ready in a week, the technician said. As they left the lab, Sophie's phone rang. It was the hospital. Her heart pounded as she answered. Miss Durand, it's about Claire. There's been a complication. The world seemed to slow. Sophie barely registered Emma tugging on her sleeve, asking what was wrong. And Thomas stepping closer, concern etched on his face. We're on our way, Sophie replied automatically, hanging up. At the hospital, chaos awaited. Doctors and nurses rushed around, monitors beeped relentlessly. Sophie guided Emma and Thomas to the waiting room, her heart hammering in her chest. What's going on? Thomas asked, his voice trembling. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to stay calm for Emma's sake. Claire had a relapse. They're not sure if she'll... She couldn't finish the sentence. Emma, sensing the severity of the situation, began crying quietly. The following hours were a blur of cold coffee, whispered prayers, and heavy silences. Sophie alternated between comforting Emma, caring for the twins, brought in by a neighbor, and pleading for updates from the doctors. Thomas, for his part, seemed lost. He paced up and down, occasionally stopping to stare out the window, a distant look in his eyes. During one of his restless walks, he finally spoke. I should have been there, he murmured, mostly to himself. Sophie, rocking one of the twins, glanced at him. What? I should have been there, he repeated, louder this time. For Claire, for the kids. I screwed everything up. The silence that followed was weighted with years of wrong choices and missed opportunities. It's not too late, Sophie said softly. You're here now. Thomas looked at her, tears glistening in his eyes. Before he could respond, a doctor entered the waiting room. Family of Claire Dubois? They all stood, tense. She's stable, the doctor said, and a collective sigh of relief filled the room. It was close, but she's a fighter. She'll need intensive care for a while, but we're optimistic. Sophie felt her legs nearly give way with relief. She pulled Emma close, holding her tightly. The days that followed were a mix of hospital visits and caring for the children. Sophie juggled an exhausting routine, feeding the twins, taking Emma to school, visiting Claire, working remotely when possible, and trying to maintain any semblance of normalcy. To her surprise, Thomas started appearing more often. Initially, the visits were short and awkward, but slowly he got more involved, changing diapers, albeit clumsily, reading Emma bedtime stories, and even attempting dinner one night, which left the kitchen in shambles, but the effort was appreciated. A week after the DNA samples were taken, the envelope arrived. Sophie stared at it from her seat at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of the future in her hands. "Shall we open it together?" Thomas's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, looking nervous but present. Sophie nodded, indicating the chair beside her. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The words jumped off the page. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Thomas let out a shaky breath. "I knew, of course, but seeing it like this makes it real," Sophie finished softly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of confirmation lingering in the air. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked, his voice small. Sophie looked at him, seeing not the man who had betrayed her, but a scared father trying to find his way. "Now," she said firmly, "we're a family, complicated, unconventional, but a family, for these kids." At that moment, one of the twins started crying from the next room. As if on cue, Emma ran into the kitchen. "Sophie, Daddy, Louis is crying again." Thomas stood, determination in his eyes. "I'll take care of it," he said, surprising both Sophie and himself. As Thomas left to tend to the baby, Sophie pulled Emma onto her lap. "Hey, honey, how about we visit Mommy at the hospital today? I'm sure she'd love to see your new drawings." Emma's face lit up. "Yes, and we can bring flowers. Mommy loves daisies." Sophie smiled, feeling a rush of love for this little makeshift family. "Absolutely, sweetheart. We'll make a beautiful bouquet for her." While they prepared to leave, Sophie glanced again at the DNA results on the table. It was just a piece of paper, yet it represented so much. The end of a lie, the beginning of a complicated truth, and the promise of a future none of them could have predicted. But watching Emma cheerfully choose her outfit, hearing Thomas softly soothing Louis in the other room, Sophie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As a family, the morning sun filtered through the curtains of the hospital room, casting a golden glow over Claire, who was sitting up in bed, flipping through a photo album. Her cheeks, once pale, now held a faint blush, a sign of her gradual recovery. The door opened quietly, and Thomas entered, carrying a bouquet of fresh daisies. He hesitated, as if unsure of his welcome. Claire looked up, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," Thomas replied, placing the flowers in a nearby vase. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Claire said, closing the album. "The doctors say I might go home in a few days." Thomas nodded, sitting in the chair beside the bed. His eyes fell on the album. "What were you looking at?" Claire hesitated, then opened it again. Old photos. When Emma was a baby. "Have got us." Thomas leaned in to see, his face a mix of emotions as he looked at images of a past that felt distant now. One photo in particular caught his attention. He was holding a newborn Emma, his face shining with joy. "I was so happy," he murmured, almost to himself. Claire watched him carefully. "What changed, Thomas?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unresolved pain. Thomas closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. I got scared," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. "Of responsibility, of commitment. I thought I wasn't good enough, so I ran, and I've been running ever since." Claire reached out, gently touching his arm. "It's not too late, you know, to be the father they deserve." Thomas lifted his gaze, meeting hers. "I don't know how." None of us do at first, Claire said softly. But we learn together. Outside the room, Sophie paused, having overheard the conversation. She held Emma's hand, the little girl eager to see her mom. For a moment, Sophie felt like an intruder on this private moment. But then, steeling herself, she lightly knocked before entering. "Look who came to visit," Sophie announced with a smile, as Emma ran to hug Claire. "Mommy!" Emma exclaimed, carefully climbing onto the bed. "Look what I made at school." While Emma proudly showed off her drawings, Sophie and Thomas exchanged glances. She noticed a new determination in his eyes, a resolve she hadn't seen before. In the days that followed, the transformations became more apparent. Thomas started showing up regularly, not just for quick visits but to truly participate. He took Emma to school, helped with the twins, and even volunteered to grocery shop. One evening, while Sophie was putting the twins to bed, she heard laughter coming from the living room. Curious, she peeked in and saw Thomas and Emma building an elaborate pillow and blanket fort. "Careful, princess," Thomas laughed, as Emma tried to drape a sheet over the top. "Let's do it together." Sophie's heart warmed at the sight. It was as if the Thomas she once knew, the caring, playful man, had finally resurfaced. With Claire recovering at home, a new routine took shape. Sophie, who initially thought she'd step aside once Claire was better, found herself more integrated into the family dynamic than ever. One morning, as Sophie prepared breakfast, Claire joined her in the kitchen. "You know," Claire began, sipping a cup of coffee, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here, Sophie." Sophie paused mid-pancake flip, surprised. "Really?" Claire nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "You've been incredible with the kids. With all of us, really. I think you're exactly what this family needed." The words hit Sophie hard, drawing tears to her eyes. Thank you, Claire. That means a lot." The two women shared a look of mutual understanding, a bond forged through extraordinary circumstances. As the days turned into weeks, the changes became even more pronounced. Emma, once so anxious and serious, now flourished. She smiled more often, laughed more freely. Her teachers noticed a remarkable improvement in her academics and social skills. The twins, Louis and Leia, also grew rapidly. Their first smiles, their early babbling. Each milestone was celebrated by the entire family. Sophie found herself amazed at how attached she had become to these two little lives in such a short time. One Sunday afternoon, they all gathered at the park for a picnic. Sophie looked at the scene before her with a mix of surprise and contentment. Thomas pushed Emma on the swing, her laughter ringing out across the playground. Claire sat on a blanket, playing with the twins, and Sophie found herself right in the middle, part of this family portrait. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, sitting down beside her. Sophie smiled, gazing at the family in front of them. "How much things have changed, how we've all changed." Thomas nodded, following her gaze. "I know I've made so many mistakes," he said softly, "but I'm grateful for this second chance, to know my kids, to be the dad they deserve." "You're doing a good job," Sophie said honestly. "We all are, I think." Just then, Emma came running, her golden curls shining in the sun. "Sophie, Daddy, come see the sandcastle Mommy and I are making." As they stood to follow her, Sophie felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This wasn't the life she had planned, far from it. It was complicated, at times confusing, and certainly unconventional. But looking at the smiles around her, the clear love in each interaction, she wouldn't trade it for anything. The transformations would continue, of course. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make. But together, as the improvised and imperfect family they were, they would face every obstacle, and in the process, they would keep growing, changing, and loving day by day. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Sophie absent-mindedly stirred her mug, lost in thought. The house was quiet, the children still asleep, offering a rare moment of peace. Her suitcase lay half-packed in the hallway, a silent reminder of the decision she had been putting off for weeks. Now that Claire was recovering and the family routine settling in, Sophie knew it was time to consider her next step. Yet the thought of leaving, of walking away from this family she'd grown to love, made her heart ache in ways she never expected. The soft sound of footsteps pulled her from her reverie. Claire stepped into the kitchen, looking stronger and healthier each day. "Morning," Claire said gently, reaching for a cup of coffee. Her eyes caught sight of the suitcase in the hallway, and a flicker of concern crossed her face. Are you leaving?" The question hung in the air, laden with unspoken emotion. Sophie took a deep breath, bracing for the moment she knew would come. I'm not sure," she admitted. "Part of me feels I should. You're recovering, things are stabilizing. Maybe it's time I go back to my own life." Claire sat at the table, her eyes intent on Sophie. "And if your life were here now?" Sophie blinked. "What do you mean?" "Sophie," Claire began, her voice gentle but firm, "you've become an essential part of this family. The kids adore you. Emma, well, you've seen how she's blossomed with you around. And the twins, they recognize your voice as much as mine." Tears prickled Sophie's eyes. "But what about you? And Thomas? Isn't it weird having his ex-fiancée living here, helping to raise your children?" Claire let out a soft laugh. "Our situation is already so unconventional. What's a little more weirdness? The truth is, Sophie, you fill a space we didn't know needed filling. You bring balance, love, and stability. We can't imagine our lives without you now." Claire's words hit Sophie with overwhelming force, releasing the emotions she had been bottling up. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't want to leave," she confessed in a whisper. "I love you all, but I'm afraid I'll just be in the way, making things complicated." Claire reached out and took Sophie's hand. "You're not in the way. You are the way to a stronger, happier family. Stay, Sophie. Please." At that moment, small footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Her gaze fell on the suitcase, and she looked stricken. "Sophie? Are you going away?" Emma's tiny voice was filled with fear. Sophie immediately knelt down to her. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Emma flew into Sophie's arms, hugging her tight. "I'm glad. You're my Sophie now." Heart swelling with emotion, Sophie looked at Claire over Emma's head. The two women shared a knowing smile. The decision was made. In the weeks that followed, a new family dynamic emerged. The house, once fraught with tension and conflicting emotions, now breathed harmony, even amid the daily chaos of raising 3 children. Thomas, true to his promise of greater involvement, visited regularly. His interactions with the kids improved each time, and even the awkward moments with Claire and Sophie began to ease. One afternoon, as Thomas played on the floor with the twins, he glanced over at Sophie, who was helping Emma with homework at the kitchen table. "You know," he said softly, so as not to wake Leia, who had dozed off in his lap, "I've never properly thanked you for everything you've done and still do." Sophie looked at him, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "You don't need to thank me, Thomas. I'm here because I want to be." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know, and that's why I'm grateful. You're giving them what I should have given from the start." Before Sophie could respond, Claire entered the living room with a stack of papers. "Thomas, we need to discuss child support and financial arrangements." The topic of support had been a point of tension in recent weeks. Thomas, acknowledging his responsibilities, had offered to pay, but setting the amount and terms had been delicate. To everyone's surprise, Thomas didn't hesitate. "Sure, actually, I've been thinking. How about we set up a joint account for all the children's expenses? I can deposit monthly, and you both would have full access." Claire and Sophie exchanged surprised glances. It was more than they'd expected, a gesture that showed not only financial responsibility, but also trust. "That would be great," Claire said, a genuine smile lighting her face. As the days went by, the family continued to adjust and evolve. Claire, gaining her strength back, returned to work gradually, her paintings now reflecting a new depth and emotion. Sophie managed to balance her remote job with the household responsibilities. The children thrived in this new environment. Emma, formerly anxious beyond her years, now laughed freely, her creativity bursting forth in colorful drawings plastered across the walls. The twins, Louis and Leia, grew strong and curious, their developing personalities beginning to shine. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sophie found Claire on the balcony, gazing thoughtfully at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked, joining her. Claire smiled, a look of peace and contentment on her face. "How unpredictable life is. A few months ago, I was at rock bottom, fighting for my life, terrified for my children's future. And now I have a bigger family than I ever dreamed of." Sophie nodded, completely understanding the sentiment. "It's funny, isn't it? How the most painful things can lead to the most beautiful outcomes." "Like a phoenix rising from the ashes," Claire agreed. "We rebuilt ourselves, all of us. And in the process, we built something new and wonderful." The two women fell silent, contemplating the night sky and the path that had brought them there. "You know," Sophie finally said, "I never imagined my rival would become one of the most important people in my life." Claire laughed, a sound full of warmth. "And I never thought my ex's fiancée would become my best friend and co-mother to my children." They exchanged a look of shared understanding, a bond tempered by extraordinary circumstances and strengthened by the love they shared for three special children. From inside the house, the soft cry of one of the twins broke the moment. Without hesitation, both women stood, ready to answer the call. As they walked back in, Sophie reflected on the journey that had led them there. The pain, the tears, the moments of despair. All had been part of a rebuilding process. Like a complex puzzle, each painful piece found its place, creating in the end a beautiful and unexpected picture. This was not the life any of them had planned. It was complicated, sometimes confusing and certainly unconventional, but it was theirs. A family rebuilt from the ashes of broken dreams, stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. And as Sophie lifted Louis into her arms, murmuring soft words of comfort, she knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where she was meant to be. This was home. The autumn sun filtered through the windows of the spacious suburban home, lighting up the kitchen where Sophie and Claire worked side by side, preparing an elaborate breakfast. The smell of freshly made waffles and brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the children's laughter coming from the living room. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Sophie asked, beating more waffle batter. Claire smiled, slicing strawberries into thin pieces. "Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. Other times it feels like an entire lifetime has passed." They shared a look filled with mutual understanding. The past year had been a journey of highs and lows, of challenges and triumphs, but above all of healing and growth. In the living room, Emma, now 6, played happily with the twins, Louis and Leia, who were about to celebrate their first birthday. Emma's carefree laughter echoed through the house, a sound that a year ago had seemed nearly impossible. "Mommy, Sophie!" Emma called from the living room. "Come see the castle I built for the twins." Sophie and Claire exchanged another glance, this time filled with surprise and emotion. Emma had only started calling Sophie Mommy a few weeks earlier, so naturally that it had taken everyone by surprise. "I'll go take a look," Sophie said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Don't let the waffles burn," she teased Claire before walking off. In the living room, Sophie found an elaborate structure made of colorful blocks, with Emma proudly standing by while the twins crawled around, occasionally knocking over a tower or two. "Wow, Emma!" Sophie exclaimed, genuinely impressed. "That castle is amazing." Emma beamed at the praise. "It's to protect the babies," she explained seriously. "Like you and Mommy Claire protect us." Sophie felt her heart melt at the child's words. She knelt down, pulling Emma into a tight hug. "We'll always protect you, my love. Always." A knock on the door interrupted the moment. "Must be Daddy," Emma squealed, running to open it. Sophie stood, picking Louis up while Leia clung to her leg. She made her way to the front door, where Thomas was stepping inside with a large wrapped package. "Good morning, everyone," he said, smiling as Emma bounced around him excitedly. "I brought a gift for the birthday kiddos." Claire appeared in the hallway, drying her hands on an apron. Thomas, you didn't have to. Of course I did, he gently interrupted. It's not every day my twins turn one. The emphasis on "my" didn't go unnoticed. A year ago, Thomas could barely hold the twins without looking uncomfortable. Now he moved confidently, scooping Leia into his arms while Emma and Louis tried to unwrap the present. Everyone gathered in the living room, watching as Emma, helped enthusiastically by the twins, tore open the gift wrap. Inside was a lovely set of educational toys, perfect for the baby's development. They're wonderful, Thomas, Sophie said sincerely. They'll love them. Thomas smiled shyly. I researched a lot. Wanted to make sure it was something useful and fun. Claire placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did great. Thank you. The moment was interrupted by the kitchen timer. Oh, the waffles, Claire exclaimed, hurrying back. I'll help, Thomas offered, following her. Sophie stayed behind with the children, helping Emma arrange the new toys while the twins banged happily on the boxes. In the kitchen, Claire and Thomas worked in comfortable silence, stacking waffles on plates and setting the table. So, Claire said casually, how's work? Thomas smiled. Good, actually. I got that promotion I mentioned last month. Thomas, that's great, Claire exclaimed. Why didn't you say anything earlier? He shrugged, embarrassed. I wanted to be sure everything was settled first. But, yeah, it's a great opportunity. And, well, it means I can contribute even more for the kids. Claire observed him for a moment, noticing how much more relaxed and at peace he seemed. You know it's not just about money, right? Your presence, your time, that means a lot to them, to all of us. Thomas nodded, his expression serious. I know, and I'm trying. Claire, really trying. We know, she said softly. We're proud of you. The sound of laughter from the living room broke the moment. They finished setting the table and called everyone to breakfast. The meal was a cheerful, chaotic affair. Emma chattered animatedly about school, the twins made an adorable mess of their waffles, and the adults talked and laughed. To an outsider, it might have looked like a typical family gathering. But to those present, each moment was precious, a testament to how far they had come. After breakfast, while Claire and Thomas tidied the kitchen, Sophie took the children to the backyard. It was a perfect day, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and new beginnings. Emma raced across the lawn, chasing bubbles that Sophie blew, while the twins watched in fascination, clapping their chubby hands. From the kitchen window, Claire and Thomas watched the scene. Did you ever imagine things would turn out this way? Thomas asked quietly. Claire shook her head. Never. But I'm grateful they did. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've made so many mistakes, Claire. Hurt so many people. We've all made mistakes, Thomas, Claire interrupted gently. What matters is what we do afterward. And you're trying. You're being the dad they deserve. Claire's words seemed to resonate deeply with Thomas. His eyes shone with unshed tears. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me this chance. For not giving up on me. Claire smiled, resting a comforting hand on his arm. We're a family, Thomas. Complicated, unconventional, but a family, and families don't give up on each other. Outside, Sophie had joined Emma's game, running around the yard while the twins sat, giggling in their stroller. The scene was a living picture of joy and love. As the day wore on, the house filled with even more laughter, conversation, and the occasional baby cry quickly soothed. It was the sound of healing, of love weaving its way through the cracks left by pain. When evening fell and the children were tucked into bed, the adults gathered on the back porch, each with a glass of wine. A toast, Sophie proposed, raising her glass. To family. To second chances, Thomas added. To love. In all its forms, Claire finished. Their glasses clinked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet night. As they stood there, gazing at the stars and reflecting on the year gone by, a palpable sense of peace and gratitude filled the air. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and heartbreak. But through it all, they had found something precious, a family forged not by blood or convention, but by love, understanding, and an unyielding determination to make it work. And as the night deepened, bringing with it the promise of a new day, one thing was clear: healing does not always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes through our wounds, transforming scars into bridges that connect us in ways we never imagined. For Sophie, Claire, Thomas, and the children, this was not the end of their story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, filled with possibilities, challenges, and above all, love. Love that had healed not just their individual hearts, but had created something new and beautiful from the fragments of broken dreams. And that, they knew, was the greatest miracle of all. The backyard was unrecognizable, transformed into a children's paradise with colorful balloons, sparkly ribbons, and a large banner reading, "Happy First Birthday, Louis and Leia." The sound of laughter and lively chatter filled the air, mingling with cheerful music in the background. In the middle of it all, Claire, radiant and full of life, twirled with Leia in her arms, the little girl squealing with delight. Not far away, Sophie helped Louis take his first wobbly steps toward Thomas, who knelt with open arms and a wide grin. "Come on, buddy," Thomas encouraged, his eyes shining with pride as Louis finally stumbled into his arms. Emma, now 6.5, flitted from one group to another, her party dress swishing behind her. She paused by Sophie, hugging her around the waist. "Mommy Sophie, can I have another piece of cake?" she asked, her big eyes pleading. Sophie laughed, ruffling the girl's hair affectionately. "Just one more, okay? We don't want you getting a tummy ache before your big speech." Across the yard, Claire handed Leia to an eager Dr. Martin, who lifted the giggling baby in the air, eliciting more laughter. The look Claire and Dr. Martin exchanged did not go unnoticed by Sophie, who smiled to herself. "Looks like love is in the air," came a gentle voice behind her. Sophie turned to find Lucas's warm smile. "It certainly is," she replied, allowing herself to relax in his hug. The party continued, a celebration not just of the twins' first year, but of everything they had overcome and built together. Friends, family, and neighbors mingled, creating an atmosphere of joy and community. When it came time to sing Happy Birthday, everyone gathered around the decorated table. Claire and Sophie stood side by side, each holding one of the twins, while Thomas lit the candles. The scene was a living testament to how love can transcend tradition and form new kinds of families. After the cake was cut and served, Emma cleared her throat dramatically, climbing onto a chair. The backyard grew quiet, all eyes turning to the petite figure in the center. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice shaking a little from nerves. "I wanted to say something. Today is my brother and sister's birthday, but it's more than that. It's the birthday of our family." She paused, looking at Claire, Sophie, and Thomas, whose eyes glistened with tears. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost my dad, but instead, I gained 2 mums and a huge family. Mommy Claire is the strongest in the world. She fought sickness and won. Mommy Sophie showed up like an angel when we needed her most. And my dad, he learned how to be a real superhero." Thomas swallowed hard, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. Emma continued, her confidence growing. "I learned that family isn't just about who has the same blood. It's about who loves you, who takes care of you, who makes you laugh when you're sad. Our family is different, but it's the best one in the whole world." Applause and cheers echoed around the yard as Emma finished, leaping off the chair into a group hug with Claire, Sophie, and Thomas. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, the adults gathered on the porch, watching the children play in the fading twilight. "So," Thomas began, a playful grin on his face, "I hear you two are planning on buying neighboring houses?" Claire and Sophie exchanged a conspiratorial look. "Well, it just made sense," Claire explained. "The kids are used to having both of us around. And honestly, I can't imagine life without Sophie now." Sophie blushed slightly, squeezing Claire's hand. "We make a pretty good team, huh?" "The best," Thomas agreed, admiration in his voice. "You two are amazing with the kids. I'm grateful you're part of their lives. Of my life." A comfortable silence settled, broken only by the distant giggles of children. "And what about you, Sophie?" Claire asked with a teasing smile. I heard some rumors about a certain charming teacher and a possible proposal. Sophie's cheeks turned crimson. Lucas and I, well, we're talking about the future, but nothing's certain yet. Well, whenever it is, Thomas said gently, know that you have our full support. Lucas is a lucky guy. Sophie looked around at the group, feeling a wave of gratitude. I'm the lucky one, she said, to have all of you. As night fell, enveloping the yard in gentle shadows, the scene was one of pure harmony. Emma, exhausted but happy, dozed on Claire's lap. The twins, Louis and Leia, were nestled in Thomas's and Sophie's arms, respectively. Dr. Martin and Lucas joined them on the porch, bringing fresh drinks and soft conversation. Looking at this unconventional family, bonded by love and adversity, it was clear they had found something rare and precious. It wasn't the happily ever after of fairy tales, but something better, a real love, multifaceted and resilient, capable of overcoming any obstacle. And as stars began to appear in the night sky, one silent certainty hovered over them all. The future, with all its challenges and joys, would be faced together, as a family, just as it was always meant to be.